Welcome to the Snetterton 300 circuit for the F3 Cup race. We've got a dozen cars lining up on the grid, and they are headed by Henry Chart, who shares the front row with Zachary Clayman de Mello. Aaron Steele and Jacopo Sebastiani behind them on the second row, and 4 more rows of F3 cars behind them. So we get the green light, and it is Henry Chart leading the field away, but briefly, only just briefly, because Zachary Clayman de Mello is straight down the inside of him in the Carlin car. Number 13 up into first position as they head around Riches and down towards Montreal for the first time. And you can see what the kind of conditions we have got here. Lots and lots of rain pouring down and trying to make a move around the outside at the Montreal corner, but Clayman de Mello holding on to his position for the time being. But this rainstorm may have just caught a few of the drivers out, because as you can see, all these drivers tiptoeing around the track on slick tyres, and some doing so rather better than others, losing contact with the track entirely there. That is car number 27, James Lederman, who has gone off backwards down at the Palmer corner, and the drivers finding these conditions utterly treacherous because their slick tyres will have lost all temperature as the Norfolk rain has thoroughly caught out the field, and Zachary Clayman de Mello having to explore some unusual lines as they round the Williams corner, staying well away from the inside line of the circuit where the rubber will have built up, because there will be no grip there now that the rain has started to fall. But nonetheless, de Mello has got himself a nice little lead at the end of the Bentley Straight as he sweeps left into Brundle corner, and following in behind him there in third position is Aaron Steele. He started from third on the grid, but he has seen a couple of the drivers around him swap positions, and the rest of the field filtering out of the bomb hole for the first time, but under very grey and cloudy skies for this race, and the rain doing them no favours at all. There goes Wade Eastwood in his distinctive red and bright yellow liveried car, and they tiptoe out of the remodeled sharp left-hander at Murray's, that new corner which they built a few years ago. And I definitely saw one of the cars running a little bit too wide at the exit of that corner and losing grip completely. But there is Zachary Clayman de Mello with a clear GoPro camera mounted on the top of his roll hoop, and clearly still pressing on despite the fact that the conditions are less than favourable for slick tyres. It seems we've only had a fairly brief rain shower here, so the drivers content to stay out on their slick tyres for the time being. So de Mello it is, leading from car number 50, which is Henry Chant, who started this race from pole position but was beaten on that run down to turn 1. And de Mello, the Canadian driver, having his first season in Pucker single-seater cars, having moved up from kart racing, where he was shepherded through the ranks by the same karting instructor who helped bring Lance Stroll up into Formula 4, where he was racing last year, was a Formula 4 champion, and he's now racing in European Formula 3. And Zachary Clayman de Mello, I'm sure, eager to follow in those same footsteps, and Carlin giving him some useful extra practice at this race in the F3 Cup at Snetterton. But there is Henry Chant, our former pole sitter, and Clayman de Mello, you have to say, is not leaving him behind too quickly. The gap between the pair of them not increasing very much at all. And then just a little bit further back, we have got Aaron Steele. He is rounding the right-hander at Williams and heading down the long Bentley Straight and under the bridge at Starkey's back towards the left-hander named after Norfolk's most famous Formula 1 driver, Martin Brundle. And then the right-hander at Nelson is the next corner that they have to tackle on this extended version of the airfield circuit, which was redesigned a few years ago and extended. So out of the corner, there goes Aaron Steele, and the conditions still very, very tricky indeed. You can see there are almost tram rails developing behind the cars where they're running on this super damp and slippery surface, and it has to be said, most of the drivers so far being able to keep their cars on the black stuff and deserve maximum praise for being able to do so, because these are some of the most challenging conditions. It's one thing to be racing on a fully wet track on full wet weather tyres, but trying to cope with a wet surface on slick tyres is a very demanding challenge indeed. That is Jacopo Sebastiani running in front of Louis Hamilton-Smith. There's a driver who it's easy to confuse with a more famous counterpart, and running quite wide there at Montreal. goes Aaron Steele, and he's got Jacopo Sebastiani behind him, but we've got a bit of dicing for position going on between Stuart Wiltshire and one of his rivals as they round Riches and press on down towards Montreal. And there they are, arriving at Montreal now. It is Alf Skeels who is putting Wiltshire under pressure down at one of the slowest corners on the Snetterton track. This is the infield part of the circuit, this extended section, which was basically just a field for so many years. The cars head off towards the sharper left-hander at Agostini and then take a quick left at Hamilton before tackling the tricky right-hander at Odgies. There is Louis Hamilton-Smith, and the back end gets away from him. And just as we were saying how tricky it can be to keep the car on the black stuff in these conditions, you only need to tread on the throttle a tiny little bit too severely, spin those rear tyres up, and you are pirouetting off. But fortunately for Louis Hamilton-Smith, this remodeled Snetterton track features quite a lot of runoff, and he was able to get away with that and rejoin the action. And the action is going on up in front of him as well, because Daniel Tapinos is putting the pressure on Stuart Wiltshire now and chasing him out of Williams and onto the straight. And meanwhile, Zachary Clayman de Mello is picking off a couple of the slower runners. That is Adrian Holy, who it appears has just gone a lap down. And you can see the rain is still continuing to fall here, but for the time being, the drivers still sticking it out on slick tyres. And difficult though this may be, and you can certainly see the conditions are only getting harder, you can see that from the fact that the tread that the tyres are leaving behind them is getting more and more easily distinguished. But there is perhaps no better way to refine your driving ability than trying to tackle a wet circuit on a set of slick tyres, and as you can clearly see, this is just getting wetter and wetter. Very tricky proposition indeed for the dozen drivers currently circulating. Well, we've had a swap of positions, because I can see that Daniel Tapinos has indeed taken that position away from Stuart Wiltshire. So is he now going to be able to press on and perhaps make a move on Jacopo Sebastiani? We pick up on Aaron Steele, who is running in third position, and there you can see the gap back to Sebastiani and Daniel Tapinos, and behind him car number 8 of Stuart Wiltshire, who lost that position unseen a moment or two ago. So down at the Montreal hairpin, just look how much understeer Jacopo Sebastiani has as he tries to get his car swung into that super sharp corner. And that is a classic understeer condition, and exactly what you expect to see in conditions like these. However, one driver who seems quite at home in them is Daniel Tapinos in that black and gold car. He's already made up one place, and so far he seems to have these conditions pretty well sussed. There is Wade Eastwood in one of the older F3 cars, local driver, as you can see, and sure enough, down the inside goes Daniel Tapinos. Is he able to get the car stopped in time? Yes, he is. So he's moved up another place at the expense this time of Jacopo Sebastiani. So there goes Daniel Tapinos, and that is something you really look for in these kind of conditions. The drivers that make the moves are the ones that impress you the most, and also Stuart Wiltshire now making a move at the expense of Sebastiani. So I wonder if perhaps Sebastiani made a mistake somewhere, perhaps dropped a wheel onto the grass or ran a little bit wide, and that's given his two rivals an opportunity to gain some ground. But Tapinos certainly looking confident at the moment, and confidence breeds confidence in conditions like these. Once drivers are able to make a few moves, if they're able to lap more quickly and brake more severely, it helps retain temperature in their brakes, that helps them retain temperature in their tyres, and that is super critical. And that is why confidence breeds confidence, because it can help you keep your tyre temperatures up, and it can help you drive faster and brake later, even when track conditions are getting worse and worse. So there goes Daniel Tapinos. He's not been able to shake off the attentions of Stuart Wiltshire just yet. Wiltshire keeping him well in sight. And we appear to have a battle developing for second position now between Henry Chart and Aaron Steele. So Steele is gradually gaining on the occupant of second place, and off down at the hairpin. How have the conditions suddenly worsened, I wonder? And very, very well to avoid him there by Aaron Steele, as Henry Chart had that spin down at the Montreal hairpin. You never want to arrive at a corner backwards, and under the circumstances, Chart has done very well to get that car going again, having only lost one position. But Aaron Steele it is who's moved up into second place, and somewhere up ahead of the pair of them Zachary Clayman de Mello continues in his untroubled way. There is James Lederman, who we saw heading off backwards early on in the race, but he's been able to get his car going again and continuing to lap without any problems. And the battle for second place continues, but Henry Chart, having had that mistake at Montreal and kept his car going again, suddenly closes in a lot on Henry Chart as they come around the right-hander at Riches. They're now into the Williams turn, which is going to feed them back onto the Bentley straight. And is he close enough to perhaps get in the slipstream of the car ahead of him? We'll find out shortly, but in the meantime, Zachary Clayman de Mello up at the sharp end of the field, absolutely untroubled, and will be collecting the checkered flag very shortly. But down into Nelson, and it's another spin for Henry Chart. He's lost it a second time, and I'd be surprised if he doesn't lose a couple of positions there, because he's taking a while to get going again. And sure enough, Daniel Tapanos and Stuart Wiltshire come through as Henry Chart regains the circuit. But there's the checkered flag for Zachary Clayman de Mello, a consummate performance by the Canadian driver, pulling away cleanly at the head of the field. Second place goes to Aaron Steele after a very difficult race in treacherous conditions, and Daniel Tapanos is well rewarded for his hard work with third position ahead of Stuart Wiltshire. A difficult race, and any of the drivers who got to the end of that one without a spin can be very proud of their day's work. So Zachary Clayman de Mello wins ahead of Aaron Steele, Daniel Tapanos in third place, followed by Stuart Wiltshire, and Henry Chart rounds out the top five after his spin.